Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this program is World Watchers. It is program number 824, September the 21st, 1987. For the last 3 weeks, I've been talking about items in the news that identify the Reagan administration to gun running, to terrorists, to George Habash, the Achille Laura hijacking, to Abu Habas, to Abu Nidal. And it's very important to not lose sight of those names. They're a little bit complicated, but I want you to remember them and remember the linkage that is coming out now regarding arms to Iran and the administration and the role of Ollie North and Admiral Poindexter connected to these particular people, and Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor, with his links to Mr. Agnelli of Fiat. And I just want to run those down for you real quickly before I get on to some other news. August the 31st, program number 881, I was making the links, making the connections that I take from the regular news media. This one was from Newsday. The links of Monzer Al-Kassar, the most well-known drug dealer and arms dealer in Syria, after Henry Arsan passed away, evidently taking over his throne because they connect directly. And their links to George Habash as well is to General Secord, Albert Hakim, and Oliver North. The following week, September the 7th, program 882, I was making more connections of the Italian arms to Iran, the relationship to Abu Habas, the mastermind between the Achille Laura, the yellow fruit account of our Defense Department that Oliver North could use, the role of Liddy connected to that, the mystery of Demivan, Henry Arsan, the Vatican, Ronald Reagan, and it's very important to put Ronald Reagan right into this, and Mr. Glauco Partel, Nugan Bank, Eugene Bartholomeus, because this whole story is like the tar baby. Reagan's getting his little fingers into the tar, and it may be time for the powers that be to ease him out, and I'll go into that in a few seconds or minutes. The following week, after the broadcast on the arms and mystery of Demivan, etc., I brought up on program 823 last week the Wall Street Journal article, Italy arrests 32 in investigation of arms sales, involving a family, Mr. Ferdinando Borletti and his son, weapons sold to Iran, 3 million mines sold to Iran that made were in Italy, and done by people involved with our Defense Department, links to our military, and also 50% of the company is owned by Fiat, which is headed by Giovanni Agnelli. He's chairman of Kissinger Associates, a member of the notorious P2, and this article, this series of articles just the past week, make the connection to Abu Nidal. So for several weeks, George Habash, Achille Laura, Abu Habas, and Abu Nidal are getting closer to the Reagan administration, and the Washington Post had an article September the 9th. In addition to all of these factors, they had a plot to kill Ronald Reagan at the Venice summit, and for reasons of, I guess, good security or working on this case for a few months, which the articles say they did, the helicopter was not blown up there, but Oliver North was part of the Federal Emergency Management, and you remember when Reagan was shot, or maybe you don't, in 1981, how George Bush and Alexander Haig in particular and the Defense Department were ready to step right in. Well, there was an article in the Washington Post one day earlier than the one describing these same terrorists and the plot to kill Reagan. It leaves that out, but I want to share that with you right now. It's titled, Italy May Find Its Own Mines in the Persian Gulf. 33 arrested in illegal arms shipments to Tehran in a scandal Rome calls the Iran Gate. And this is very similar to the one that they had the next day, except it leaves out the Reagan, the idea that these people are also sending rockets and weapons to shoot down Ronald Reagan. And just some of the points in this article that are not in the others I mentioned last week. It says the story as it unfolded in the Italian press involves a rich, well-known industrialist, scion of one of Italy's leading capitalist clans, a secret middleman of dual nationality, illegal arms to Iran via third countries, a raid by the customs agents of a Lebanese freighter carrying arms for terrorists linked to Abu Nidal, and drugs for the mafia, and secret documents left behind hastily in a vacated hotel room, and that's how the P2 scandal broke when over 500 names were located in a hotel room. Over the past month, Augusto Lama, one of the prosecutors, investigating magistrate, is working in the Tucson port city of Massa, and the public prosecutor Giovanna Panebianco on Saturday issued 45 warrants for arrest. And I mentioned the prominent arms manufacturer Ferdinando Borletti and his son Giovanni. The senior Borletti, grandson of the founder of Italy's popular Rinascente department store chain, heads it, a company that makes mines, especially mines and munition, called Valsella Meccano-Tassina in Italy. Half the company is owned by another firm, Gilligardini, a subsidiary of Fiat conglomerate, and the Fiat conglomerate is Mr. Agnelli, and on the board of that, sharing with Kissinger Associates, of course, are Agnelli and Kissinger are very, very close. And this is important because for years I've maintained that Kissinger was part of the supersedes me that creates the left, so the left, the Red Brigades, or whether in Reagan's case, the SLA, and creating the terrorism, the Bologna bombing, and et cetera, the different kinds of strategy of tension with former Nazis, the heirs of Otto Skorzeny, and working with him until he was alive until 1975, could create a military dictatorship out of terrorism. This Washington Post story on the 8th said the Borlettis and others are accused of not only shipping illegal arms to Iran, but associating with suspected mafia figures and unspecified Arab terrorists believed to be linked with Abu Nidal group. And the article goes on, Italian authorities arrested Boutros, the head of a 16-man crew, and a mystery Arab passenger with a false passport. The ship was searched coming into Italy from Lebanon with arms and drugs. The People said that Aldo Angesa, and I mentioned him last week, a reputed middleman in the clandestine arms commerce between Italy and Middle East, holds both Italian and Swiss citizenships, naturally, and he was waiting for the ship, the Bari, to be docked. They raided Angesa's hotel room, and that's when they found these documents, and then he turned himself in. According to investigators, the prosecutors claimed to have evidence that the arms were being brought to Italy by the ship's crew for Arab terrorists in Italy, who were possibly linked to the Abu Nidal case. And again, years ago in 1982, I was doing broadcasts on Abu Nidal as having been behind the shooting of an Israeli ambassador in London that gave the feeble excuse for Alexander Haig in June of 82 to tell the Israelis to invade Lebanon, and at that time they picked up several $1 million worth of weapons that they sold as arms around the world for their own profits. Now, there were several other articles, not as long as the Washington Post story, but in other papers. One is titled, Italians May Have Their Iran Scam Too, Arms Ring Allegedly Plotted to Kill Reagan. Another one from the Monterey Herald, Italian mine sent to Iran. Pro Bursay, the illegal arms ring believed broken. Well, it isn't broken. These things aren't broken. They're just fractured. And then Newsweek had a story, the shame of the game, the smell from the scandal blows over Europe. And I'm citing these sources because so far I didn't see anything in Time magazine, but the Reagan administration, it goes on, called it Operation Staunch. A better name might have been Operation Sieve. As the Iran-Iraq war in the Persian Gulf ground on, American allies kept secretly shipping weapons to Iran regardless of the formal protests, sometimes filed several a month, filed in Washington, and by last fall the world learned of the White House own secret arms sale to Iran out of our own country. A U.S. embargo made it look like an outright farce, but the administration's public humiliation was more persuasive than moral argument. The smell of the scandal has now broken over Europe, said House Armed Services Committee Les Aspin, and pressured governments there into halting arms sales. And this is an article out of Newsweek, as I say, September 21st, 1987, the smell of the scandal. Another one from the Washington Times, of course, in the past tense, Italy crushes ring of arms and terror. Now, last week I said I would go into approximately 10 or 20, 30 translations of Italian papers linking this group to Francesco Pazienza, Michael Ledeen, and Adnan Khashoggi, the son of the Shah of Iran. But there's so many of those and so much other very pertinent news that I'm going to take that part of it and continue next week on that subject because it would take almost an hour by itself, or I'll break it into segments But there's a couple of other things I want to catch right now. The hearings are going on for Robert Bork. Many of you have been watching them, I hope, the past week. Just this morning, CNN started, and William Coleman from the Warren Commission was a black witness, a former Secretary of Transportation, who objects to the appointment of Robert Bork, and then Barbara Jordan, former congressman, a teacher, a brilliant woman, was on television, and she was so brilliant that the very conservative Republicans didn't want to ask her any questions, and Senator Humphrey agreed that she stumped him and was smarter than him, so they just declined to ask questions because they didn't want her brilliant answers. But as I was watching it, CNN covers our news, and Pacifica Radio has the full coverage. Thank goodness that they do that. I mean, we can all be grateful that they cover that gavel to gavel. It's to their very credit that they do it. The minute that Mr. Coleman was on, and then Barbara Jordan followed, CNN broke the news for Ronald Reagan talking before the United Nations. Now, all during these hearings, there's been selectively Edwin Meese press conferences. During the Iran-Contra, when General Secord was testifying, we had an hour and a half of Jerry Falwell. There were 6 people in the press room, and then the PTL and Donna Rice and the Gulf, and a very much needed explanation of some of these witnesses was avoided by filling the news puff. But when Reagan was through with the United Nations, CNN didn't go back to the coverage with the 2 black people who are very capable of expressing their views on why Bork shouldn't be Justice of the Supreme Court. And I really think it's an outright racism. I called CNN. Incidentally, their news department is 404-827-1800. And I talked to Mr. Krieg. And I said this president's conference or speech at the UN could be in the evening news. And we've heard him enough. And these people were deleted from the view of the American people so they could hear them. And then when the Reagan was through, you didn't go back to the hearings. You went to Sonia Live, taking questions in Hollywood, and how to make guacamole with Mr. Wolf, and all the blah blahs and the ridiculous report on AIDS. You used time fillers to fill up that time so you wouldn't give the opportunity to the American people to hear it. So if you want to write to CNN or call them, you might do it. Now, I was interested to hear William Coleman speaking before the Senate Judiciary on why a vote for Bork would set his rights backwards. William Coleman was on the Warren Commission. He covered up the Nazi fascist connections to the murder of John Kennedy as he sat there, 1963 and 1964. Now he's getting a galloping view of fascism, recommending Bork for a circuit court but not for the Supreme Court. And all of a sudden, he's getting his smarts. William Coleman realizes what it would do to his race. He didn't think about that before. He didn't think about the fascists he was always covering up. He was very closely associated with David Rockefeller and Nelson Rockefeller. But it was interesting to hear him now with his back against the wall. And if Bork gets in further, his back will be further against the wall. These people seem to think they're immune from fascism. They can play the game, and someday it catches up with them, just like it did in Nazi Germany. Now, another man who's on the Senate Judiciary who hasn't quite made up his mind how he'll vote is Arlen Specter. And Coleman asked Specter a question. They intimated, of course, both being with the Warren Commission. They're old buddies. Specter invented that bullet 399. And now he's not sure about Bork. And Specter happens to be Jewish. And there's a black, and there's a Jew, and there is Bork, who can define the Constitution any way he wants and take away the rights of minorities if the Constitution didn't say it was there. And now they're waking up to the fact that maybe they have a problem in this country. But if they had done their work with the Warren Commission, they wouldn't have to sit and listen to nominations of Bork or Ronald Reagan or earlier with Richard Nixon, because they were all linked to the fascists. And then there was Ted Kennedy. He's on that Judiciary Committee, praising William Coleman. If you taped it off the television or off the radio, listen to him praising him. What a wonderful man he is. He said, "You made this a better country." I couldn't write down everything he said because I literally was puking in the air. Not really, but just wondering, where are the minds of these people? Here he sat on a commission with the cover-up of the murder of his own brother. William Coleman was on the Warren Commission covering up, lying about Lee Harvey Oswald And now it's 24 years later, and Ted Kennedy is telling him he made this a better country. He made it a better country by allowing John Kennedy to be murdered in that cupboard, and Robert Kennedy and Chappaquiddick, even with Ted Kennedy. His performance was to look the other way and not go into the specifics of how these things happened, the murder of Mary Jo Kopechne and so forth, or just being there to decide that we can cover this up. And it was really disgusting to see how these people grovel and play with each other, have no sense of history at all, and no loyalty to the people who are gunned down. Now, Jack Anderson had an article, Bork versus the Freedom of Information Act. He cites examples in Maripol versus Mies. The children of executed Soviet spies, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, had used the Freedom of Information to seek FBI documents on their parents' case. The FBI withheld documents that they said were entitled to exemption by reason of national security and privacy and law enforcement needs. Bork's opinion on perhaps the most extensive Freedom of Information request ever made said the FBI's withholding the documents was proper. In McGee, that's Ralph McGee versus CIA, the court ruled that the agency, the CIA, had the burden of proving it had made a thorough search of records in a Freedom of Information Act. Bork dissented, saying there was no evidence of bad faith by the CIA, but merely bureaucratic inefficiency, and that's Bork on that case. Now, the undecided on the Judiciary panel, in case you want to write these down and write to these people and tell them how you feel, is Robert Byrd, Dennis DeConcini, and Howell Heflin, and Arlen Specter. Byrd from Virginia, DeConcini from Arizona, Heflin from Alabama, he was on the Iran-Contra hearings, and Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania. He's not sure that he wants to have Robert Bork. And the ones for it, of course, are Strom Thurmond, Orrin Hatch, Alan Simpson, Charles Grassley, and Gordon Humphrey. So if you want to write letters, don't write to the people who already are against him, such as Patrick Leahy, Paul Simon, Howard Metzenbaum, Edward Kennedy, and Biden. Write to Byrd and DeConcini, Heflin, and Specter and tell them how you feel. Now, judges are very important, and Ronald Reagan has made over 231 appointments so far that will affect people's lives in the Court of Appeals of what they can do. The San Jose Mercury had a story September the 19th about the way Ronald Reagan is using the courts in addition to trying to put this nominee on the court. It's titled, Sources Link the Judge's Retirement to the Medal. President Reagan will award the Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award, to former Chief Justice Warren Burger, the one who helped write a new constitution with no trial by jury, and Judge Irving Kaufman, the White House said Friday. The Washington Post said that Attorney General Meese and several White House people arranged for Judge Kaufman to get the medal after he agreed to retire from active service. Kaufman's retirement and the medal were part of an explicit trade. Now, Judge Kaufman, it continues, the retirement of Kaufman, a liberal on many issues, makes room for a conservative, for a Reagan conservative, on the closely divided Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New York. The Reagan administration plans to nominate Stuart Summit, a former law partner of Deputy Attorney General Arnold Burns, to fill the vacancy. Summit would be the administration's 8th appointment out of 13-member panel, considered one of the most important in federal courts. The Washington Post said that 2 senior White House officials opposed awarding Kaufman the medal, but others joined Meese to persuade Reagan to give him the medal. It is my understanding there was no quid pro quo between the medal and Kaufman, said Terry Eastland, a Justice Department spokesman. Kaufman announced in June he was taking senior status on the appeals court. He announced it he refused to comment on the trade. Kaufman, as a trial court judge, ordered the execution of Soviet spies Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, along with Roy Cohn, who was one of his assistants, who was on the board of Western Gold and just died of AIDS this past year, and he was also on the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. He assisted Judge Kaufman in the execution of the Rosenbergs. in 1951. He's also known for his liberal rulings of the First Amendment, civil rights, prisoners' rights, environmental protection, and other issues. Now, one of the things that Judge Kaufman did that isn't here, as soon as Reagan became president, he asked Judge Kaufman to be head of the chairman of a crime commission to investigate organized crime in this country. And after the crime commission was finished, you didn't hear very much about it because the conclusions that were printed in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Washington Post, and then hushed up, were the Italian pizza money, and that goes back to those terrorists and drug dealers in Syria and Stiebbaum, and also Nazi connections of Mengele and Klaus Barbie in South America. He concluded, and his commission concluded, that a lot of that money that came from this large group of drug dealers, drugs and arms and mafia, and you see the term mafia in terms related to the Agnelli company, the Fiat, that owns 50% of the mine manufacturer. The Crime Commission referred to and did extensive work on the deposits of the organized crime money, and not just organized crime. It was the Italian Stiebbaum that I've talked about for years, and since 1982 when the report came out, that it was linked to E.F. Hutton, and chairman of the E.F. Hutton was, until just a few months ago, Scott Pierce, the brother-in-law of George Bush. And the other firm that was noticeable for depositing this money, Italian pizza mafia money, gun running, was Merrill Lynch. And chairman of Merrill Lynch was Donald Reagan, who then became Secretary of the Treasury and then later White House Chief of Staff. And he kept that appointment even after this report came out about his institution depositing this money, and it involved a lot of money. It was called the Pizza Connections, and it went right to Tomasi Buscetta and the Italian Stiebbaum and the P2 connections to drugs and guns and so forth. When Martha Mitchell was aware of the arrest at Watergate, the first thing she said was the mafia is in the White House. That's when she was taken to the hospital and got an injection in her butt and a few in her hotel room, and then proceeded to slowly disintegrate of a horrible cancer, as I've said before, with symptoms not different, very different from AIDS. So Judge Kaufman will step down because he's too liberal on other issues, but he's also being pushed out because it was his crime report of E.F. Hutton and Merrill Lynch that could be the key to the Iran-Contra story if it were properly developed, and if it's the biggest eye in the world. Now, last week we had a fundraising at Kazoo. It's a listener-sponsored station. So after my first hour of news, I have a talk show and I take calls. And then I stayed in the station to help with telephone calls afterwards for a couple hours. And for the first time since I've been on the air, and this is 16 and a half years, there were approximately 6 or 7 telephone calls, one after the other, furious that I talked about the Pope, that I talked about his relationship that was in the Chronicle past week, about links to the P2, to the late Michele Sindona, God's banker, the late Roberta Calvi, part of the God's banker, and Paul Marcinkus. And I don't know whether it was one woman and one man, and each called 3 times, but they were furious. Where are your sources about working for IG Farben and so forth? Many of you have heard this over and over, but nobody has called the station. We knew they weren't regular listeners, but with the Pope coming here 2 days later, 3 days later, they were really up in the air and tuned and told to listen to the program. I'm sure they never heard it before and don't care about it. But when I gave the sources and I gave my telephone number, I said, call the house, and I'll talk to you during the week. I'll give you the sources of Solvay Chemical, IG Farben. Now, one of them called. And so for those that are listening that wouldn't call in tonight, the San Francisco Chronicle, September the 16th, had a story about the Pope, and it said Wojtyla participated in underground efforts to help the Jews escape the Nazi Holocaust. And there never was one piece of that in his autobiography, that he did that. And the same Chronicle says that Wojtyla pursued his studies in acting while supporting himself at jobs in a stone quarry, later in a chemical plant. Now, we heard about the stone quarry and the chemical plant, and they were both Solvay Chemical, IG Farben. And I did find another article in the newspaper, a different paper, that did identify in the San Francisco Examiner the background of the Pope, and it tells about that Poland was occupied under the Nazis. What, till his father had a heart attack, he started studying for priesthood at night in the underground in Krakow, working in the day as a laborer for Solvay chemical plant. Solvay is IG Farben. My regular listeners know there's many sources to this. Also, when Pope John Paul II was in Monterey, he urged the landowners and the growers, he had a large mass for 70 or 80,000 people here, to respect the just claims, and this is a quote, to respect the just claims of migrant workers. In remarks prepared for delivery in San Francisco, he also told the people who had AIDS that God loved them. But in his speech here, it was for the large Catholic population, and he told them that the growers and the landowners should respect the claims of the migrant workers. Well, the very day he was here, there was a claim put outside the Carmel mission by an American Indian who claimed that the mission belongs to them and that they're ready to take it back. And the Monterey Herald has a story, having been forbidden by the Diocese of Monterey to enter the graveyard and pray for their ancestors buried there, about 15 Indians marched solemnly to the rectory door, rang the electric bell, and asked to see Monsignor McMahon, pastor of the Carmel Mission Basilica. When McMahon came to the door, Indian leader Anthony Miranda asked permission to enter the graveyard. "I don't have the authority," said McMahon. "I have again to say no. The diocese established authority. You can pray anywhere. The mission is closed to everyone. You can come back on Friday." And he told them that they couldn't come into the mission. He said, "We are sad the fact that the church refuses to let us in, but however, the land is ours, and grandfather is buried there. We want to see him." And at that point, they handed to the person in charge of the mission, Monsignor Eamon McMahon, a notice that they're ready to take back the mission, that it was their property, that it wasn't sold, it wasn't bartered off or traded for anything. It was literally stolen from this particular tribe of Indians who were there at the time, and that they were prepared to take it back because there's no way that it belonged to the Vatican. And he said, "We, the Costa Noan people, claim this land back for my people." And they posted a notice, as I say, this is our land. So the Pope says that the farmers should give land to the migrants who come here. So maybe it's time for the Vatican to give back the land it stole from the Indians in the first place. And the whole tone of the Vatican isn't just one small issue. The Latin America press that is sent to me by a listener has many articles about the Vatican continuously. One last week, September the 3rd. Bishops line up with the ultra-right as Argentines go to the polls. And I mentioned that Pio Luigi was here on the Monterey Peninsula, and he gave comfort to the Argentine right, the tortures and so forth, and was here the day that the Pope was here. Another article from Latin America Press, there are many, many, but these were just pertinent this week. Brazil's progressive Catholic bishops retreat on some key political issues, and the Catholic is pressuring them to go back on their views, and the Catholics are very active in turning the clock back. And it's just very sad that some people just don't grow, or institutions don't grow, and seem to stay the same no matter what the minds or the wills of the people, the awareness is. The growing awareness of people is one thing, and those who control them is another, and that's the way it seems to go throughout history. Now, regarding the Vananu trial, there's 4 articles on Cameroon. I'm not going through all of them for you. I just want to cite them. The National Geographic, it was sent to me by a World Watcher just this past month in September, 87, has an article, Silent Death from Cameroon, the Killer Lake, and it said, without warning, one evening in 1986, a lethal jet of carbon dioxide spewed from Lake Neos. Local myths tell of angry outbursts of lake spirits. The gas has posed many questions for scientists. And if you read the National Geographic article, and I'll share more of it with you later, it continues about what happened in Cameroon. It said experts disagreed on why the gas released so violently. They had a conference last March that I cited for some of you. They compared data and theory. There's several schools of thoughts that emerged as not one single one. Some think carbon dioxide gas accumulated. The majority of the scientists concluded the gas had dissolved slowly in the lake. itself, and that it was simply a time bomb. Then the question was asked, what event finally triggered the release? The scientists were unable to agree on the mechanism, but many possible triggers were identified, and of course they list a few of those, but nothing about the possibility of a neutron bomb. And there's some very good pictures of Cameroon if you want to see it in National Geographic. Now, the Kansas City Times had a letter to the editor this September, sent to me by World Watcher. It's called Denied Support. 2 years ago, Mordecai Vanunu, a technician at Israel's Dimona nuclear complex, revealed to the London Times that Israel possesses not only hundreds of nuclear warheads, but also the hydrogen bomb and the neutron bomb. I'll take a 1 minute now for a break, but some articles it's very clear that Israel has the neutron bomb, and I want to share that with you and just go back to several more articles about Cameroon and continue along with some of the news. This is Mae Brussell. This is the second half of World Watches, program number 824. Before I continue on Vanunu, maybe some of you new listeners want to know why I bring him up all the time and update you on this particular subject, and I will be writing a long article on this shortly, hopefully in October, maybe October, November. Mordecai Vanunu was arrested, kidnapped in Italy, taken there by a ruse by a woman allegedly associated with the CIA, got him from London to Italy where he was kidnapped, and taken to Israel where he's having the most strict isolation and what you call a trial. He'll probably get life in prison if he isn't shot for revealing that Israel has the neutron bomb. And I realized that when the explosion at Lake in Cameroon on the lake in 1986 blew up, that the situation there was very similar to the neutron bomb, the way we've heard it described. In fact, the first clue I got was a person who came to the site and said, this looked like a neutron bomb. So I began to collect all the articles and scientific material I could on Cameroon, and Shimon Peres, the Prime Minister of Israel, arrived in Cameroon at the same time with a crew of 17 doctors that he hardly flies around with all the time, and they went to Cameroon while he visited with the new president. The president's been in there 2 years. It was a military coup, and instead of a native, well, the person there is very close to the Vatican. As a matter of fact, the military leader of Cameroon now invited the Pope there as soon as he was in power. And the Pope and the P2 and the Mafia and Steve Bauman, the gun running and the terrorists, and these kinds of activities that work very closely with Israel, such as slaying the people in Lebanon, giving the approval of our government, and working with the Italian government, had a pattern that looked as if Cameroon was a test case for the neutron bomb. And so I will be writing about it. I just want to share a couple more things about it. In the B'nai B'rith Messenger, September the 11th, there's an article about Vanunu's dad prays for his son. It's a large family, and he feels very badly about his son. The son had left the family and converted to Christianity and was very disappointed the way Israel conducts itself. He was disillusioned. And the article said Vanunu's father turns to his recent visit to his son in a distant Israeli jail. He calls Mordecai keeping quiet most of the time. When he did say something, it was complaints that the guards beat him. They want Modi to die and forget his memories, Mr. Vanunu said. His luck would only have him in trouble, and apparently it was decreed by the heavens that he would know no joy. The father felt so badly, that's what he was saying. The father said that he has little chance to forget his son's deeds, because in Israel, this is what is happening to him. You'd think this was South Africa, not a religious country or whatever. He said he was beaten recently by neighborhood thugs who recognized him as the father of Israel's accused traitor. Otherwise, neighbors shun him. People jump on me as if I was the accused Nazi war criminal Don Demanjuk. I don't know what I am accused of. What was my sin? People forget the obligation to respect an elderly man, and instead they torture me. The elderly Vanunu says that wherever he goes, people shun him. He has no friends, and he's the father of the person. He didn't know this was happening. He wasn't part of it. He didn't work with his son, but both of them are being abused and beaten, and the son talks about being beaten. The New York Times had a story September the 6th, 1987. In Cameroon, the press finds caution pays, and it tells about the sub-Sahara Africa's various countries. And while the press is generally free, the role of press in Cameroon isn't. And as I say, it is a military dictatorship, and their placards are saying, "Down with press censorship, we want free speech." And the article continues about sending different writers to jail. 2 of them were sent to jail, and the president of Cameroon is very strict with them. One of the quotations he said was, "I'm in favor of censorship, not for the sake of censoring, but to make journalists responsible, to make them work for the common man, for the interest of the country." And working with the under self-censorship system, the civil servants of the Information Ministry published the Cameroon Tribune, which is the dominant paper that runs about 65,000 copies. Last year, a government attempted to buy favorable coverage. A French journalist, Jacques Tiller, acknowledged that the Cameroon government had regularly paid him about $30,000 every 3 months since 1985 to write favorable articles on Cameroon. If you wonder why you're not getting much coverage. Last June, this is in 1986, and remember this is, at the trial at the time of just around the explosion, shortly before the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir visited here, and Shimon Peres was the first one, then Yitzhak Shamir, Cameroon officials met with local reporters who were to attend a news conference that Shamir was to give. The purpose was to assign individual reporters to ask questions prepared for it in advance by the government. So there is Israel protected by the president of Cameroon, and just as Vanunu is secreted away, the press can't ask any Israeli questions. Even if they wanted to, they'd probably be lined up and shot. And then in these times, at an article just recently by Diana Johnstone, she's a fairly good writer and researcher, does a good job, called France, West Germany, and the Neutron Bomb Diplomacy. And this again goes into the candidates that want the neutron bomb, and particularly that was pushed by former President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. And in that era, it was William Casey and Alexander Haig that were pushing the neutron bomb in Europe to be deployed. This was before Mitterrand was in. And this is about the neutron bomb diplomacy and this nice weapon, these nuclear weapons, if they're outdated, use the neutron bomb, because then you just get rid of people and animals, and you have all the resources of factories and the various cathedrals and museums. The people are out of the way very quickly, and everything they had belongs to you. It's an absolutely perfect weapon. I think AIDS is the second best weapon. Neutron bomb is first, and can be used selectively in both cases. I get a lot of letters from people who particularly appreciate my giving sources of books and sources of information such as Covert Action or publications like In These Times or Guardian or Central American papers, and things that they wouldn't be turned on to any otherwise, and that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I just want to tell you that there is it's called a film festival, the Home Film Festival. I don't know how many of you like foreign films, but there's documentaries and very valuable films, and I consider most of the foreign films to be like attending a play. Home Film Festival has video cassettes, and you rent them by mail. They mail them to you, and they have the label and the stamp. You keep them 3 days and mail it back after 3 days, and you just put it in the same box it came in, put a label over your label, and you don't have to go down to a video store, and it's on its way. And I'm going to give you the phone number, toll-free number, to call them, 1-800-258-FILM. This is in Pennsylvania. Or you can write P.O. Box 2032, Scranton, Pennsylvania, 18501. Now, the first film I wanted was Sorrow and the Pity, which was just amazing. The membership for the film festival is $25, and they send you a book of 60 pages, and then they update it with every picture you get or every month. So I already have almost 100 pages of films, and you can order them as often as you want. There's no minimum, no maximum, and they have a plan that you can order 1 a week, 2 a week, 3, and they just come regularly. You don't have to place your order, and you can say whether you want them to come on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or the weekend. So I worked out myself arrangement. I listed 20 movies, and another one came in Ingmar Bergman last week, and next week it's going to be The Serpent Egg. And that's Serpent's Egg. That's an Ingmar Bergman movie that I talked about for years on the radio, and many of you don't know the name. And I tried to get our local theater where they have these types of films, and was told it wasn't available. There was going to be a fundraising for Kazoo, and they wanted to know if I'd speak. And I said, if you get The Serpent's Egg. Then we had a Monterey Film Festival, and they wanted suggestions for an old movie, and they had some very good political movies, and I said, Serpent's Egg. No, we can't get The Serpent's Egg. And we have a Monterey Institute where they have 2 foreign films each week, and I try to get there at least once a week. And I asked, any requests? I write down Serpent's Egg. No, you can't get it. Well, this Film Society has it, and I recommend that you get it and watch it, and you might share with me things that you've ordered that I don't know about, and I'll update some for you if some of you want to. There's a lot of documentaries and a whole list of them, and some that you missed, I've missed, some we want to see again. And it's very, very valuable I think, to belong to this collection. I'm just really thrilled that it exists. 2 friends in the Carmel area who belong, World Watchers, and friends told me about it. So I recommend that you send for this and use your own taste and choice, and then pass on to other people what they can learn from this instead of all the junky television that's around. As a matter of fact, where we live, the cable system just put in a whole new system with all the different channels going up to 30 or 40 in home box office and the entertainment stations. And I had them in for 1 week, and they came this morning and moved everything out. I don't want it. I'll take C-SPAN, CNN, just the basic 13 channels, and get these movies from Pennsylvania, because that's a much more intelligent way to not waste your time, rather, but to learn and enjoy and drink in some of these feelings and attitudes from different countries. Now, in terms of the Italian article that was about Italy, the Washington Post, that was sent around the country, the plans to kill Ronald Reagan, I have done broadcasts on the incidences that suggest that Reagan might be in trouble. The helicopter exchange going to his home up in Santa Barbara, the articles about him that suggested that he was ready to retire, that he's impotent, and indications that he's now expendable. Also, the martial law plan and Jack Terrell, the article about Jack Terrell and how he's interviewed by the FBI on the plot to kill Ronald Reagan. I had that on program 818. And trying to frighten Reagan, program number 820, the National Security Council with Jose Sorzano and Elliot Abrams and the others sending him messages that may make him at least scared to change his policies because of the dangers that he was around at this time. Now, Lou Cannon is the White House correspondent for Washington Post and the various newspapers syndicated, and he has an article in the LA Herald, September 14th, 1987, titled Swan Song Agenda, No More Weed Studies, Luxury Condos. And this has to do with Ronald Reagan's wanting to be remembered for some very important things, so he's not going to waste money picking on the welfare state and money sent to study weeds or buying suits for undertakers in Greece and all the dumb things he talks about. And he's sort of, according to this article or this resume, you can get the collected works of Ronald Reagan in a 13-minute speech he gave to the White House that week of the September 14th, but he's mainly going into the Contras and Bork. That's his big shtick, to get those accomplished, to fund the Contras, hopefully to overthrow Nicaragua and get Bork on the Supreme Court. But then Lou Cannon, who knows Reagan as well as just about anybody who follows him, said, but Reagan is no longer as keen as he used to be, even with a script, and his aides dare not expose him to a news conference. Last week, Reagan repeatedly fumbled his lines, once saying that his administration had, in quotes, more than 6 years behind us and just 6 more months to go. And he made notice that the curtain call is 16 months, but Reagan is a performer who can't remember his lines. Now, the Kansas City Times article that was sent to me by Donald Call said maybe this Reagan slip wasn't a slip at all. And this article said there was a little noticed item in the news the other day that just might possibly be the most sensational political story of the decade. And remember the article I cited from the Washington Post, September 8th and 9th, where, particularly the one on the 9th, saying that the story in Italy, this current Iran gate scam in Italy, could turn half of Italy upside down. And those people are closely related to the Reagan administration. This article says, when Reagan returned from his vacation this week, he announced his agenda for the rest of his term in office: support the Contras, confirm Bork, and on the Supreme Court. But he said one other very interesting thing that didn't get a lot of attention. He said he hoped to get those things accomplished in the remaining 6 months of his term. Perhaps it was a misstatement, but what if the president meant it? What if he's planning to resign in his office in 6 months? So going back to broadcast 820 on August 24th, I cited in quite length and detail the plans to frighten Ronald Reagan and also the connections of Reagan to the terrorists in the Middle East and Henry Arsan and the Rossano Brazzi, part of that whole operation, Reagan and Frank Sinatra, the connections of these people in this administration to what's going on in Europe right now. Now, a gentleman who I mentioned was interviewed by the FBI and pressured as possible fall guy for the Reagan assassination story if it happened, and this was in 1986. He has an article in the San Francisco Examiner, September the 12th. Ex-Contra supporter says, North tried to discredit me. Oliver North last year orchestrated an effort to discredit Jack Terrell as one of the first to link North to a secret Contra aid network. He claimed that Terrell was a Nicaraguan spy plotting to assassinate Ronald Reagan. And here is North, who works with George Habash, Abu Nidal, Hadas. He's working with all these, Assad rather. The three of them are a little bit confusing, but not really. The terrorist group that Oliver North bought his weapons from for the Contras came out of this terrorist group, the same group that's linked to the plot they had to kill Reagan. This article says Terrell is now assisting the investigation of alleged Contra drug and gun smuggling. He's also working with Peter Del Scott and the Christic Institute. The Congressional Iran-Contra panel this week released censored copies of Oliver North's memos to President Reagan regarding Terrell and a Justice Department report on the FBI investigation. Now, did North send memos to President that Terrell was being asked about plans to kill Ronald Reagan? The article goes on. Former National Security Advisor John Poindexter told the Iran-Contra panel in closed-door testimony this year that he showed Reagan memos from Oliver North outlining the charges against Terrell, a former paramilitary supporter of the Contras who later had a falling out with the rebel leadership. However, Reagan apparently was never told by the FBI or Secret Service later that they cleared Terrell after subjecting him to lie detector tests for 2 days. Think of the implications here of telling a man who possibly may be killed by a former, in quotes, Contra, who then would be framed, just as after John Kennedy was killed, the FBI said, oh, we had reports that he knew about it and had notified the FBI a week or 2 weeks in advance that John Kennedy was going to be killed in Dallas. But the reason the Secret Service and the FBI didn't tell Ronald Reagan that Terrell was cleared was that they could always use it on the records later. Yes, we had word that he planned to kill Reagan, and they could pull a Lee Harvey Oswald at the same time. And the article says, Terrell said, I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, but never against my country. What they were trying to do was damage control, said Terrell, who was never charged with any crime. A July 17, 1986 memo from North to Poindexter titled Terrorist Threat, Terrell states that an unnamed security officer for North's Project Democracy evaluated Terrell as extremely dangerous, possibly working for the security services of another country. This is like Theodore Shackley and Michael Ledeen and Frank Turple working and shaping the script and the lies, along with Claire Sterling and Paul Hense of the CIA, that the KGB and the Bulgarians tried to shoot the Pope. All of the Iran-Contra team coming from that group. So they have the record that he may have worked for another country. And the article continues, the FBI now believes that Terrell may well have been a paid asset of the Nicaraguan intelligence service or another hostile security service, North memo said. So this team not only planned to kill Mr. Sims, the ambassador to Costa Rica, who used to be in Colombia, to blame Nicaragua, to invade Nicaragua, but they were creating this Terrell story. And when Reagan survived the summit, I had mentioned on the air several times that it would be hard to do the assassination after the Christic Institute filed their suit May 29th, 1986. And all of these people involved with this White House secret team and the National Security Council and the Defense Department would be linked to the assassination of Ronald Reagan if it had taken place, because they were identified in the Christic Institute. So then North can tell Poindexter, tell the president, here are these people, so that they couldn't go through that then, but if there was another attempt to kill Reagan or to scare him, they could pull out the record. We told you we thought he was involved in gun running and drug smuggling, and so that he would be smeared. This Tom Posey from Civilian Military Assistance, that's based in the South, I believe Alabama, Southern-based paramilitary group, was the ones that were supposed to be investigating Terrell and feeding this information. You've seen Tom Posey on the news a lot of times. So Poindexter is telling Reagan in July 28th, which is 2 months after the Christic Institute is filed and 1 month after the plot to kill him in Venice, which was obviously called off. The article says Poindexter's memo also said that the FBI reports that Terrell went to Miami coincident with your visit on Wednesday. The FBI, in concert with the Secret Service, has Terrell under active surveillance. Like James Hosty of the FBI was following Oswald and was out at Irving, Texas, talking to his wife and leaving his name and the license number of his car, and it was identifiable. And with Mrs. Payne, Terrell, using the alias, this was their report, Colonel Flaco, was once the inner circle of Contra military chief Enrique Bermudez and CMA paramilitary group. He helped plan aborted November 84 CMA strike into Nicaragua. But Terrell said he was shut out of the aid network because he refused to go along with a plan to kill Eden Pastora. And again, these deaths come up all the time, and I'm spending a lot of time on this. It's so important to see how many people these people wanted to kill, and by the grace of God, whether it was Khomeini or Gaddafi or Sims or Pastora, there is, maybe it's the year of the convergence or whatever, or it was preceding with a little slow motion, because the Pastora is helping the Christic Institute, as is Terrell, and are identifying the people who really had killed 7 journalists and attempted to kill Pastora and 2 of the plaintiffs with the Christic Institute. So he left the group because they wanted to kill Pastora, and they were doing illegal gun running. And Tom Posey, the CMA's leader, has vigorously denied Terrell's accusations. Terrell said his only contact with the Nicaraguan embassy was to infiltrate the Sandinista government at one time and pass himself as a disaffected Contra. He resurfaced again in 1986 as a witness for Kerry. He also is cited in a lawsuit brought by, they say, the liberal Christic Institute, which Accord Secord and others accused them of illegal drug and gun running. So this is the story of trying to blame and having somebody to blame if everything was according to what the plans were later. And maybe it's possible that not being able to pull that off, they're getting ready for Reagan to resign and get George Bush in because of George's close proximity to El Salvador, to the death squads, the former director of the CIA, and Mr. Gomez-Rodriguez. George Bush is up to his ears in this entire story, his aides and so forth. So maybe Bush couldn't get elected, but you would need a companion to the secret team, just as when Nixon was out at Watergate, he brought in Gerald Ford, who he appointed on the Warren Commission. Now, the Washington Post has a long article, Sunday, September the 6th. It's going to take me about 6 or 7 hours to outline it. It's so long. I'm just going to cite it to you, so if you want to go to the library, you can get it. Written by Dan Morgan and Walter Pincus, titled Our Deeper Secrets still being hidden. And it may be those deep secrets and the drug money and the mafia money and the kill money in the banks of Mr. Willard Zucker with Mr. Albert Hakim and Secord and the National Security Council. As I say, this is Reagan's tar baby. He's really stuck up to his fingers. And this article is filled with many, many pages. It's actually 4 full newspaper-sized pages, and it goes into problems that have not been opened up, the profits, the unraveling of the story, the use of William Casey's secret network and the Defense Department and the Enterprise. As I say, if you copy it at the library, take a lot of dimes. It's a long article, and I will outline it for you. The Enterprise's unspent millions, and it's got Mr. Amir Nir, the Israeli connections, and it goes on and on. As I say, I'll share it with you later, but if you want to read it now, it's very long, and it brings up questions, and there are so many questions. If you just go through the World Watches for the past 5 years, you could ask those questions for the answer to the Iran-Contra story, but there are deep secrets. And then, of course, Bush is sitting there waiting. If Reagan resigns, he couldn't get elected, but not wanting a new team that hasn't been up to their ears with this for a long, long time. You wouldn't want Jack Kemp or even Mr. Senator Dole or Pat Robertson, who the Republicans going to put in that could cover the secrets so well as George Bush. September the 9th, New York Times has a long story. Bush advisor said to no in 1986 of North deals. And, of course, North was working with Donald P. Gregg, the NSC assistant to George Bush, and a lot of stories are coming out. And, of course, George Bush was meeting with Mr. Gomez Rodriguez on the arms deals. The Wall Street Journal has a story September the 14th, 1987, Politics and Policy. Bush, blue blood, Texas oil man, Washingtonian, still must confront the question, who are you? We'll start with the order the death's head at Yale. That's a good starting point, digging up the grave, allegedly digging up Geronimo, the Indian chief. Who are you? This is the first part of a series dated September the 14th on Bush. And then the long article in the Washington Post, September the 9th, the same day that this long article was in about the Iran connections to the mafia and the drug running in Italy, the arms to Iran, $3 million worth of mines, with the connection and approval, of course, with the United States government. The Washington Post story is titled, Key Memo Raises New Questions. 1986 Note to Bush mentioned the resupply of the Contras. So that would be a very good time to put Bush in if Reagan decides to step down in 6 months. Now, there's an article in it was the New York Times, rather, August the 7th, about G. Gordon Liddy, and it has to do with his speech-making. The article says Henry Kissinger gets $20,000 a lecture. G. Gordon Liddy of Watergate makes $1.5 million a year. He lectures 4 times a week at $7,500. And the gist of the article is Oliver North could make about anything he wanted. He could name his price. Now, a listener to World Watchers brought me Newsday, Friday, August 21st. Watergate caper helps a TV career. And it's about G. Gordon Liddy, but it goes on, and he's in a TV movie for NBC. Of course, Henry Kissinger is on the board or in charge. That's another close contact, the major media. Liddy said, I've been on the other end of the talk show so much it would be about time that he played another part other than a villain, he said. Liddy said he was consulted so often during the recent Iran scam hearings that they actually put a satellite uplink in my driveway and took turns talking to me. Now, G. Gordon Liddy was a partner with the Deputy Attorney General Robert Mardian at the time of Watergate. The attorney for Robert Mardian was this Robert Greene, who was close to General Secord. He's his attorney and close to Oliver North and Fawn Hall. And Mardian and Liddy used to go down to the basement of the archives to watch Nazi Gestapo movies. Now, G. Gordon Liddy, who is close to the entire Iran-Contra group because the team's been in there a long time, is best described in the book The Secret Agenda, Watergate, Deep Throat, the CIA by Jim Hogan, the same gentleman who wrote Spooks, published in Random House in 1984. And I'll conclude this broadcast, if I can, quickly get in Chapter 2 called The Odessa. The plumbers get to work, and it tells about E. Howard Hunt in the spring of 1971. calling in the former Bay of Pigs operations. Of course, a lot of them are the gist of the entire Christic Institute groundwork for what went on later, and he's telling about his work with the teams that were so-called plumbers in the White House. This was a special unit to be called the plumbers assigned to stop leaks. That was the cover to stop leaks out of the Treasury Department. Immediately when G. Gordon Liddy was with that group, with Egil Crow, working on narcotics matters, and you see how that works, he imposed his peculiar imagination on the plumbers. He created a sensitivity indicator to distinguish our product from that of other agencies that were coordinating White House sources. Our organization was directed to eliminate subversion of secrets of the administration, and that was important. I created an acronym for it. The acronym appealed to me because when I organize, I'm inclined to think in German terms, and the acronym was also used by World War II German veteran organization, still is, belonged to by acquaintances of mine, the Odessa, the Organisation der Emmerlingen Schutzstaffel Angerbrogen. On the blackboard in German, for clarity and added security, I diagrammed a new Odessa organization. The only exception to the German was the use, common in the Nixon White House, of the Greek letters and mathematical symbol pi as a symbol for the president. I'll do more next week because my time is out. I just have to pick up there about the German veteran organization, the Nazis, that G. Gordon Liddy worked with, and his importance with the Iran-Contra story, because it does go back to fascists and Nazis, and until they unravel that background, we still don't have the basis for how these people got together. But unfortunately, I have to leave in the middle of the Odessa part. I'll be back with you next week. This is Mae Brussell, and I'm going to pick that up from there because that's the part missing out of the Iran-Contra story, just as it was out of the Warren Report and many other investigations.